Salut tout le monde, aujourd'hui on ne vous diffuse pas de pic, vous le savez peut-être pas, mais c'est les 20 ans de la série The Office. Et donc pour l'occasion, on a décidé de vous rediffuser un ancien épisode qu'on avait enregistré avec Marie et avec Mike Schur, méga star des séries US, qui a été producteur exécutif et scénariste de The Office, et ensuite co-créateur de Parks and Recreation, créateur de The Good Place, donc vraiment un scénariste et créateur de séries que l'on adore. Il était venu en studio pour nous parler de sa carrière, donc on a beaucoup parlé de The Office, et on espère que vous apprécierez réécouter cet épisode. On vous diffuse ici la version originale, un petit peu plus longue. Si vous préférez la version doublée, qui a été un petit peu raccourcie, vous pouvez aussi la trouver dans votre flux. Salut!
C'est pas faux. That's what the money is for.
C'est bon, Loulou.
Winter is flamenco.
The danger. I am the one who knocks.
I think
A
that
damn
I may
fine
be
cup of coffee.
the voice of my generation.
Suit up.
Coucou les Pikies. Et oui, quand il y en a plus, il y en a encore. Notre saison de Pic TV s'est achevée il y a quelques semaines, mais on ne pouvait pas vous laisser partir sans un petit épisode surprise. Pourquoi ? Parce qu'on a eu l'occasion de faire venir en studio le génialissime Michael Schur. Pas en Zoom, en studio. Il était vraiment là physiquement avec nous, dans la même pièce.
On l'a vu. On l'a touché. Alors, si vous nous écoutez et que vous aimez les séries, vous connaissez sans doute son nom. Mike Schur, c'est un des scénaristes et producteurs de The Office US. C'est aussi lui qui a co-créé Parks and Recreation et Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Et c'est lui qui a créé tout seul The Good Place.
Il a aussi travaillé à SNL, Saturday Night Live. Il a produit des séries comme Master of None ou The Comeback et co-écrit l'épisode Nosedive de Black Mirror. C'est celui avec Bryce Dallas Howard qui a un problème d'application, voilà. Bref, si vous aimez la comédie et les séries américaines, il y a de fortes chances que vous soyez un jour tombé sur le travail de Mike Schur.
Alors, il y a 2 versions de cet épisode qui sont disponibles. La première est une version doublée en français et condensée de notre interview. Donc, pour ceux qui veulent la suivre en français et qui veulent pas passer 1 heure avec nous, vous pouvez écouter celle-là.
Je comprends pas pourquoi. Mais...
Et il y a aussi une version en VO de l'interview intégrale, donc qui dure plus longtemps et qui n'est qu'en anglais. À vous de choisir.
C'est ça. Et vous pourrez retrouver la retranscription par écrit en français de l'interview sur un petit lien qu'on vous mettra dans le texte de l'épisode. Avant de se lancer dans l'interview, on veut juste vous resituer rapidement son travail. La raison pour laquelle on connaît Mike Schur, c'est parce que c'est devenu une légende déjà en tant que scénariste de The Office, mais aussi parce que tout son travail concerne principalement des workplace comedies, donc des comédies, des sitcoms qui se passent dans le cadre du travail, dans un bureau.
Et c'est aussi des formats documentaires, comme on avait vu avec The Office. Enfin, c'est pas lui qui a inventé le format, évidemment, mais il l'a décliné. Et ce qui est assez remarquable chez Mike Schur, qu'on retrouve pas justement dans The Office, par exemple, et que lui a vraiment, c'est la patte de Mike Schur qu'il a appliquée. Il fait de la comédie, mais avec des gens bons, souvent. C'est des comédies qui ont beaucoup de cœur, en fait. Ça se moque pas de la médiocrité humaine, en général. Ça s'amuse, au contraire, des excentricités des uns et des autres, mais en ayant des personnages, qui sont très sympas, gentils, bienveillants. On en avait parlé dans notre épisode sur Parks and Rec. C'est très difficile de faire ça, en fait.
Oui, parce qu'il faut dire que c'est pas gnangnan, en fait.
Non, pas du tout.
C'est un humour qui est extrêmement généreux, mais qui n'est jamais aseptisé.
Non, qui est hyper mordant, qui est original, qui est créatif. C'est brillant, hein. Et en même temps, c'est plein de cœur.
Ouais. Et vraiment, sa qualité sur The Office, comme sur les autres séries, The Office US, on en a déjà parlé un petit peu dans le podcast, est un petit peu plus cruelle et un petit peu mordante. Elle repose beaucoup sur des gags à base de farces que se font Jim, par exemple, et Dwight, ou de vasectomie forcée.
Ah oui.
Donc, il y a un côté quand même un petit peu plus méchant que dans ces autres séries, mais ce qui est très, très fort dans toutes ces séries, et c'est pas le seul, évidemment, scénariste dessus, mais c'est la manière de sublimer des petits moments du quotidien et des moments de banalité, souvent, mais de les rendre très touchants et très reconnaissables. En fait, on se reconnaît dans ces personnages-là, que c'est des personnages du quotidien, des gens de tous les jours, qui font des conneries, qui se comportent pas toujours très bien, qui ne sont pas vraiment des héros, en fait. Et c'est pour ça qu'on les aime beaucoup, c'est parce qu'ils sont comme toi et moi.
Il faut juste préciser que The Office US a été créé par Greg Daniels en se basant sur l'œuvre de Ricky Gervais. Donc, Mike Schur était un scénariste dans la série et que vraiment, les œuvres qui sont les siennes après c'est plus Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine et The Good Place. Et ce qui les caractérise aussi, c'est l'intelligence de son écriture. C'est-à-dire que c'est pas juste des blagues et c'est pas juste de l'humour de sitcom drôle. Il y a souvent un propos derrière, souvent des commentaires sur l'actualité, sur la société dans laquelle on est et parfois sur la philosophie morale.
Voilà, comme dans The Good Place. Et vous allez voir, on a parlé de tout ça avec lui dans l'interview, quel type d'humour il aime et comment on réussit justement à créer une comédie qui soit mordante tout en ayant un humour qui reste dénué de cruauté. Et on a aussi parlé de son autre fait d'armes sur The Good Place. Si vous ne voulez vraiment rien savoir sur The Good Place, honnêtement, n'écoutez pas cette interview et avancez peut-être de 15-30 secondes. Mais on a parlé avec lui du gros twist qui se produit à la fin de la saison 1 de The Good Place, qui a été un énorme moment de télévision. Et il n'y en a pas beaucoup, surtout à l'ère du streaming et surtout pour des séries qu'on a regardées sur des plateformes de streaming.
Ouais, surtout pour des sitcoms aussi. Hein.
Ouais, des moments comme ça où tout le monde s'est appelé immédiatement pour dire « T'as vu ce truc, c'est incroyable, ça remet tout en question ». C'était vraiment très très fort de sa part et il nous a expliqué un petit peu la jeunesse du truc et est-ce que ça lui a mis la pression après pour reproduire ça ou pas.
Vous l'aurez compris, Mike Schur, c'est un génie de la série comique moderne et il vient de sortir un livre, c'est pour ça qu'on a pu l'interviewer, un livre traduit en français chez Philosophie Magazine Éditeur qui s'appelle « Comment être parfait ». C'est un livre très drôle dans lequel il s'interroge sérieusement sur la philosophie éthique et sur la morale, un peu comme il le faisait dans The Good Place. C'est pour ça aussi, d'où la connexion. On peut se demander pourquoi un créateur de série a écrit un livre sur la philosophie morale, mais c'est pour ça. Alors, on a discuté de ça avec lui et aussi, évidemment, de son expérience de scénariste, de producteur, de showrunner dans l'industrie des séries télé.
We're here in the studio with Mike Schur. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to talk about your great book, a very funny book about philosophy and ethics and morals. Mm-hmm. And we're going to try to determine if we are
good people.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing here today, huh?
Exactly.
We're determining whether you two are good people.
Exactly.
And you too.
Great.
That's the only reason we wanted you to come. I don't know if people have told you this before, but in France, there are a lot of The Office fans.
I've heard that.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that The Office is better than Parks and Rec, which we
disagree.
Yeah, we disagree. And we think that's because The Office is a little meaner and less optimistic and sunny than Parks and Rec. Do you think that's the case? And do you think niceness gets a short shrift?
I think that's possible. I also think that every single person on earth has worked in an office before. And so it's likely that some of that is just people identifying aspects of their own life in that show as opposed to working in government, which not many people do. More people in France than America, certainly. But I think The Office is more basic to the human experience than Parks and Rec. And I don't know about the meanness or the optimism. I think it's possible. I think there were certainly people who watched The Office and took the wrong lessons from it, I would say.
For sure.
And there was an occasional criticism of Parks and Rec that it was too rosy colored, that it was too optimistic, or that it made government seem like too positive a force for good in the world or something like that. But that tone, I didn't create The Office. I didn't adapt it. That was Greg Daniels, who is a genius and is my mentor. He and I made Parks and Rec together, but I ran the show the whole time it was on. And it's just my personal preference. I just prefer comedy that is warm and inviting. I really loved working on The Office. It's fun to indulge in that side of comedy writing when you can be a little bleaker and a little meaner occasionally even, or have characters who are a little sharper edged. But I personally just like comedy that's sort of warm and embracing. So I think that's the way that Parks and Rec ended up going.
How do you create drama with characters who are morally good?
The typical way that sitcoms create stories is the conflicts are between the characters. So in Friends, Joey and Chandler are fighting over something, or Monica and Rachel have a disagreement about blah, blah, blah. The way that Parks and Rec did it is we took the position that all of the characters were going to be fundamentally good people, and the conflicts would come from outside the office. So usually what was happening is the conflict of the episode was a citizen in the town had a problem and was being annoying about it, and then Leslie would have to deal with that issue. That doesn't mean there weren't conflicts between the characters. Ron Swanson had a diametrically opposed political viewpoint to Leslie Knope, and so they were in conflict a lot. Leslie was a bit of a steamroller and kind of drove her friends crazy sometimes with how overbearing she could be. We certainly found plenty of ways to create conflict between the characters, but it wasn't out of cruelty or it wasn't out of them not liking each other. when we needed there to be genuine anger or conflict, we went outside of the little club that the office and had people show up and then make unreasonable demands of Leslie, and then she had to deal. People are unreasonable in the way that they demand their government behave. And so it was never that hard to find ways to create conflict with the town that Leslie was serving and representing.
Yeah, lots of raccoon conflict too.
Plenty of raccoon conflicts, yep.
And lots of Tammys.
Yeah.
Many
Lots
times.
of Tammys everywhere you look, yep.
Is it harder to write good jokes that are nice and not bleak?
I don't think it is. I think it's actually easier to write cruel jokes. It's like to give into that feeling of ridicule or mocking or anger, whatever you want to call it. Like, I kind of think that's a cop-out for comedy. Like, it's just a personal preference thing. I've never liked that kind of humor. I don't like it, especially when people punch down. It just always seems unnecessary and annoying to me. A lot of comedians who are getting in trouble now for various things that they say in their acts are outraged because I should be able to say whatever I want. And it's like, okay, but if you say something that I don't like, I can stand up and say that sucks and I'm leaving, right? So there's a mentality in comedy that I don't ascribe to, which is that everything is fair game and everyone should be allowed to say anything they want. It's like, you can say whatever you want and you won't be arrested. Fine. But just because you can say everything that you want doesn't mean you should, or that it's good to say everything you want. So I don't know. I'm hardly saying something revolutionary here, but personal preference, I prefer comedy that doesn't come from anger.
About The Good Place, it's a comedy show about moral philosophy. Was that a hard premise to sell?
A little, yeah. I finished Parks and Recreation and Brooklyn Nine-Nine was on the air, and my bosses told me very nicely that they would take any idea that I had and give me at least one full season before they judged whether or not to cancel it, which is a little more common now. At the time, it was fairly rare. And when they said that, I was very grateful. And I also felt like I should try something kind of crazy because I had been writing some version of a collection of people in an office setting for like 12 years at that point. It was The Office and then Parks and Rec in Brooklyn. So I decided to take like a crazy swing, and I had been thinking about whether there was a way to make a show out of ethics for a while. I came up with the idea for the show, and normally what happens is you sort of come up with the basic idea. Maybe you have the idea for the first episode. You know who the characters are, and when you pitch it, you give them that information, right? Here's what the first episode will be. Here's who the characters are. Here's how they might grow and change over the course of a year. Because this was a really weird idea, I wanted to give them more information so that they would rest easier when I told them I was making a show about moral philosophy. So I didn't pitch it to them until I had worked out the entire first season. So I pitched them the entire season all the way up until the twist. I didn't pitch them the twist.
Oh, you didn't?
No, because I was afraid if I did, they would tell me I couldn't do the show. So I went all the way up until the very end, and then I stopped. And I think that was reassuring to them that if they had any question about how this was going to happen, like how would this work, I was able to give them enough good cliffhangers and twists and turns and kind of crazy things that happened that they saw that there was entertainment value in it. And then I also got Ted Danson and Kristen Bell to be in it. And as soon as I did that, they were like, go nuts, do whatever you want. So I knew that it was a little bit of a tough sell in theory, and I tried to do everything I could to make it less of a tough sell.
I would think the twist at the end would be the biggest selling point. Why wasn't it?
For all I know, if I had pitched the twist to the network, they would have loved it. I don't know. It was a scary thing to pitch them because it means everything you've learned until now it gets blown up. So I waited until it was just about the time to do the read-through for that episode. And then I was like, so here's what's happening.
Holy mother-forking shirt balls.
What? Eleanor, what's going on?
It took me a while to figure it out. But just now, as we were all fighting and yelling at each other and each one of us demanding we should go to the bad place, I thought to myself, man, this is torture. And then it hit me. They're never gonna call a train to take us to the bad place. They can't, because we're already here. This is the bad place.
That twist was so good. Did you feel any pressure after the end of season 1 to kind of outdo it all the time?
I did. The thing that I said to the writers when we came back for season 2 was, we will never have that moment again. Not just because that is the ultimate twist. The show is literally called The Good Place, and then the twist is, spoiler alert, it's not The Good Place, right? You can't beat that in terms of a cliffhanger. So I said two things. I said, first of all, it's in the DNA of the show that things like that can happen. So if the goal is simply to say, like, let's honor the DNA of the show now. So big things, giant cliffhangers can happen. The world can be turned upside down if we have a good idea for it, but that's not going to be the goal. The other thing that I said to them was the reason that we got away with it is because no one was looking for it. No one in the world was watching an NBC sitcom with Ted Danson and Kristen Bell thinking that they were going to get this enormous Jean-Paul Sartre level, like it's actually no exit. So we were hiding in plain sight the whole time. And that was one of the reasons I said, like, we can't try to do this again, because now we're M. Night Shyamalan. Now everyone is watching every season to like try to figure out. And if we try to do it, people will guess. They'll be ahead of us. So there are still big cliffhangers at the end of every season. Still something crazy happens. They go back to Earth at the end of season 2. And there's a lot of wild stuff that happens. But the goal was never, let's beat season 1, because I don't think it was possible.
Do you think comedy is a good genre, or maybe the best genre to talk about philosophy?
Yeah, without question.
Why?
Think. Because philosophy is really complicated and kind of boring. And if you...
How dare you?
Look, I love it, but let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
I think for any subject that's complicated and a little boring, if you can deliver the ideas and the message through making people laugh, I think they're much more likely to engage. There are many, many, many great dramas that are, I would say, inherently philosophical. I think The Sopranos is inherently philosophical. I think Mad Men is inherently philosophical. I think Breaking Bad is inherently philosophical. These are all shows that if I were teaching a class in, say, existentialism, I would happily have a whole lecture about Breaking Bad. It's about motivation. Like, what is the motive? Is your motivation pure and does it match your action? It's also a show about actions defining who you are. And there are thousands and thousands of great dramas that are philosophical, but they don't tell people that they're philosophical. That's the difference, right? They hide their philosophy in murder and dramatic storytelling. I think the only way to do a show that's explicitly about philosophy is through comedy, because if you do a drama that's explicitly about philosophy, everyone will turn it off and be bored.
Yeah. I mean, you literally had the trolley problem, like basically a lesson inside the show.
That's right. And I think that is, to me, reading about the trolley problem, which I remembered from college, but when I reread all of the various writings, not all of them, there's thousands, but some of the writings about it, it started to really strike me as funny, which I don't remember thinking it was funny, but I was like, oh, wait, this is inherently comedic, because it's like these incredibly smart people speaking very, very seriously and saying like, okay, so you would pull this lever. Now, let's imagine that there's a large man on a bridge. Are you allowed to shove him off the bridge? Like, these things are ridiculous, and they're presented so seriously. It started to just make me giggle, and it was one of the first things where I was like, oh, this is going to work. Like, I can do an episode that's about the trolley problem, and we can actually see it, and it will be funny.
Why don't you just tell me the right answer?
Well, that's what's so great about the trolley problem, is that there is no right answer.
Here, let's try this.
Oh, God! Michael, what did you do?
I made the trolley problem real so we could see how the ethics would actually play out. There are 5 workers on this track and 1 over there. Here are the levers to switch the tracks. Make a choice.
The thing is, I mean, ethically speaking...
No time, dude! Make a decision!
Well, it's tricky. I mean, on the one hand, if you ascribe to a purely utilitarian worldview...
Okay. So, what did we learn? What are we thinking?
He thinks he just killed a bunch of people with a trolley.
It's just a simulation. I would never make you kill real people.
Oh, well, that's reassuring, because some of the parts of the fake people flew into my mouth!
Michael, can we just go back to the classroom?
We never left. Here, I'll show you.
In your book, you write about the importance of failure. What's the failure you've learned the most from?
Oh, my God. How much time
So
do
many.
we have? It's almost certainly, at least professionally, it was the first year of my life at Saturday Night Live. So I got hired at Saturday Night Live as my first job, and I got hired pretty much right out of college. I was 22. I mean, it was like the greatest day of my life. I couldn't believe it. I watched the show ever since I knew it existed, and I had just graduated from college and I had this cool job. And I was so bad. I was so bad. Like, people always think I'm exaggerating when I say this, but I'm really not. I was deeply terrible at that job for like a full year. And I really should have been fired. And the fact that I wasn't fired is a miracle. So at Saturday Night Live, the way it works is you write sketches on Monday and Tuesday, and on Wednesday there's a read-through. So Lorne Michaels and the host of the show sit at the front of this table, this long table. The cast sits around the table. And there's like 45 or 50 sketches that the staff have written. And one by one, they come up and they read through them. And then out of those, they pick the 10 or 12 they're going to do on the show. And so for week after week after week, I would write a sketch or multiple sketches, and they would be read. And all you heard in a room of like 300 people is this sound, just people, not a single laugh, like no one in the room, like not even like clearing their throats, not a courtesy chuckle, like nothing. And I would just be in the corner, just like sweating and miserable. And it was a real lesson in humility and a real lesson in failure that I lived like week after week after week. It did a couple things for me. One is, and Saturday Night Live uniquely is good at this, it really keeps you humble if you work there because the failure rate is enormous. It's not, unlike most TV shows in America, it's not communal. I mean, you are working with other people, but you're also in competition with them because there's a certain number of sketches that are going to get chosen that week. And you are in competition with the other writers who have written these sketches to see if you get your stuff on the air. And you fail all the time. And even if you succeed, even if your sketch does well at that read through, you might mount it and put it up in the dress rehearsal. That might be not the people in the read through room, but the actual audience that's staring at it silently, not laughing at all. That's even worse feeling. And then even if it works at the dress rehearsal, you might do it on the live show. Now it's on live television. People are watching it at home and the audience isn't laughing at it. I mean, the number of chances for failure is enormous. And so most of the people who work there are pretty well-adjusted people with a decent amount of humility because most, not all, most, but you fail so often. It's a really good lesson in how to not think too highly of yourself, basically. Like, I've seen the funniest people who ever lived, Will Ferrell and Molly Shannon and Maya Rudolph and Adam McKay and Tina Fey. Like, I've seen, these are the funniest people of my generation, certainly. And among the funniest people who've ever walked the earth, I've seen them all bomb. And they've all remembered the feeling of bombing. And it's really great.
We have that in French school. They make you fail all the time.
Yeah. And tell you you're terrible.
Exactly. Every day. No A for effort. Just fail.
Why do you think your original sketches were bad?
Why were they bad?
Yeah.
Because I sucked at writing sketches. It's not a mystery. I mean, I was very unprepared for the job. I had never written sketches of any kind. I wrote for a humor magazine in college. It's not for performance. It's like text. And so I had never done it before, and I just wasn't good. I was straight up wasn't not good. And and it took me like a full year of like observing and watching and learning and trying and failing and eventually like going to therapy and like talking about how miserable I was. And yeah, it was like a real thing. Like it took me a full year to even approach something like success. Mm-hmm. And as painful as it was, I'm so grateful for that year. Like that year changed my life. And I'm very happy that I went through that.
This is a tough one, but who's the most morally complex character you've ever written?
Maybe Gina from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Mm-hmm. She would be up there. Just a very complicated personality that has a lot of different codes that are overlapping and inconsistent. I think Ron Swanson is fairly morally complex, or he grows to be more morally complex as the years go on. Well, I don't know. Who would you say if you've seen the shows I've worked on?
I don't know. I mean, I think Ron is
is
a good pick.
I mean, he has a very consistent character. Like mm-hmm. he has a very strong moral compass, and he's full of integrity, but he also politically believes in a set of ideas that are not super kind. It is a little complex in that way. it's sort of a fantasy, right, that a person would hold his set of beliefs but would hire Leslie to work for him in part because he just liked the fact that she had a backbone, that what he values in people is strength of character more than political belief. And we made a whole episode out of that in the last season. Like the two of them were locked in a room together and you got to the bottom of like why in the world he hired her to begin with. And it was just because he thought she stood up for what she believed in, which is a thing he values very highly.
I think Michael Scott is pretty complex, honestly.
Yeah,
because he is both terrible and great and lovable.
And I think that's one of the great successes of the American version. I mean, the British version, he was complex as well, but like the American version made him such a nicer, like sympathetic character.
Yeah, I mean, part of that was just that they did 12 episodes and we did 200.
Yeah.
So there was more room for that. But no, that was the adjustment that Greg made when he adapted the show. Was he correctly recognized that the British tolerance for bleakness and sadness was a lot higher than the American tolerance. And so he made as the show went on in the early days, he made it a little more optimistic, and he made Michael specifically a little more kind. He made it clear that Michael's blind spots and his occasional sexism and racism were the result of him just wanting to be funny and wanting people to like him. It wasn't really who he was. Like at his core, he was like a gooey, mushy, nice person who was just misguided and valued the wrong things. He's definitely a more likable character than David Brent, I would say.
Yeah.
By leaps and bounds.
Yeah. But still makes lots of mistakes. And I think that's
Constantly.
why he's so interesting too.
Yeah. He's always blowing it.
Yeah.
We were wondering, what have you implemented on your own sets and in your own writer's room to make them a more ethically good environment?
Couple big picture things. So that first year that I was miserable at SNL, the way that I got out of it was I was in therapy and I was walking to work one day and I suddenly realized that the reason I was miserable was my job. It wasn't that I had this job and I had this life and I had some problems. I was sad and felt bad because of the job, which is a thing I hadn't allowed myself to even consider because I was 22 and I worked at Saturday Night Live. How could you ever hate your job if you're 22? And the second that I had that revelation, I got much better. That led me to believe something that I still believe to this day, and which someone else put in much more succinct ways than I ever had, which is to say, this person said to me, people in writers' rooms are either in survivor mode or creative mode, and you can't be in both. So in survivor mode, they're uncomfortable, they don't feel safe, they don't feel secure, they don't feel happy, they're nervous, they're full of anxiety. And when you're in that mode, as I remember very, very clearly, you can't do anything good. You just can't. You can't function well. And I would imagine this is true for any job, but certainly in a creative endeavor. Like if you're terrified and full of fear, you will not do a good job at whatever it is you're doing. Once I felt better and I shifted into creative mode, that's when I actually started being able to do the job, at least better than I was before. So I feel like my job when I'm running a show or am part of any show is to do anything I can to keep people in creative mode instead of survivor mode. And people are in survivor mode for a lot of different reasons. Some of them have problems in their own lives that you don't know about. Some of them it's their first job and they're nervous and they're full of anxiety because it's their first job and they want to do a good job. Any number of reasons that people could be full of fear and anxiety and not creative. So in a big picture way, this is maybe not ethics, but it's adjacent. The thing that I sort of try to say to everybody I work with is if there's anything about this job that keeps you in survivor mode, you have to tell me about it because you won't do well. I remember, I know what it's like. I also now at this point have a pretty good sense for when people are in that mode. Like I can tell when for some reason someone just isn't him or herself. Like they're not, it doesn't feel like they're effortlessly sort of just creatively participating in the discussion. And so sometimes I will find a way to take them aside and say like, are you okay? Is there anything going on here? Like anything I can do? Is it something I'm doing? Is it something someone else is doing? On the actual sets, when we were making The Good Place, I started to realize that there are certain things about TV production that are inherently unethical. As an easy example, there's bottled water everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's just thousands and thousands of bottles of water. And I asked someone who worked in the production office, I said, can you do me a favor and figure out how many bottles of water we consumed last year? And the answer was something like 24,000 over the course of a year. 24,000 bottles of water. Now, granted, that happened to be a year where we were on location a lot instead of in our little home base. And so I was like, well, that's not okay. Like, we can't, this is the easiest thing in the world to fix. So it was like, okay, new system. Everyone gets a reusable water bottle. We're going to have people in the crew whose job it is to make sure people are properly hydrated. Wherever we can, we're going to bring water coolers and fill up everybody's bottles of water. And so on the show, we went from like 24,000 bottles in season 3 to 0 in season 4. We didn't buy a single bottle of water that I know of. People might have consumed them on their own, for all I know. But the show essentially replaced 24,000 plastic bottles with no plastic bottles. We're not going to win a Nobel Prize or something, but there were certain things like that that I had never considered before, that when you do a show where all you're doing is thinking about ethics, suddenly that stuff starts to really matter. And we just tried wherever we could in the margins to like be a little better, like use a little less fuel, use less plastic, like we always, most productions already did this, but at the end of the day, there's a ton of food left over, and we would try to package it up and bring it to a homeless shelter or a food bank or someplace that could use it instead of just throwing it away. Like, again, this is not heroism. This is just like basic human decency that required no additional effort that mattered. Like, and the nice thing is like everyone was totally on board. Everyone was like, this is great. We love this. Like, this is fun.
You've been in the TV business for a long time now.
I don't want to make you feel old. Right?
No, it's way too late for that.
How would you say it's changed in the past 20 years?
It's completely different. It's a completely different place, I think. Among the biggest changes, Me Too was an enormous change. Before the Me Too movement, for the most part, any manner of bad behavior was not only tolerated, it was frequently rewarded. It was very, very wild, backwards kind of a way of doing business. And I don't just mean treatment of women, I mean treatment of anyone for any reason. I think the predominant theory was it doesn't matter what a person does if that person is making you money. And this dates back to the early days of Hollywood. If the star of a show or a big name director or a showrunner, anyone, is a complete and total asshole, but the show is working, everyone just goes along for the ride. And that leads to it leads to a number of things. Among them, people's lives are ruined. And also a lot of people just quit. Like the biggest revelation of Me Too to me wasn't that this stuff was happening. It was the saddest part of it was how many women just were like, I don't want to work in this industry anymore. Like we had a brain drain of people who were great writers and actors and producers and directors and everything, because women were just like, this is not worth it. It's not worth living my life this way. And that's not acceptable. That's not an acceptable way to run an industry. That was a huge change, that suddenly that behavior it wasn't only that it wasn't tolerated anymore, it was that it was actively sought out and rooted out. And now it's still happening. There are still people who treat women terribly in Hollywood, but they're much more likely to suffer actual consequences in a way that pre-Me Too, nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened. It was the Catholic Church's approach to scandal, which was if there's a problem here, you just pick the guy up and you move him over there. George Floyd and Black Lives Matter also had a huge effect, not just in the Black community, but I think in marginalized communities generally. Underrepresented and marginalized communities suddenly had a much stronger voice and were much more likely to speak out if they were treated badly, which prior to that they were with impunity. And then there's also in the actual business of TV, you know, when I started, there were 4 networks, and then there was like HBO and kind of Showtime and kind of maybe FX in there somewhere. But doing original programming, it was a very small number of places. Now there's 10 million. And there's some good with that and some bad. These streaming services are, in my opinion, over-reliant on their algorithms that are telling them what to program. So you go in and you pitch a show pre-streaming service era. You're pitching to a person. You say, here's my idea. They're still thinking like, will this work? Will this not work? Is this good for our network? Is it bad? But at some level, it's a human being responding and saying, I think this is good. Let's roll the dice. Now that human gut instinct has been replaced by a computer that calculates the chances for success based on who the hell knows what. And it's not that the humans were always right. They were very frequently wrong. Like, of course they were. They were thousands and thousands of decisions were made to produce TV shows that ended up in bad TV shows. The problem is that when you replace the human element, you are going to invariably miss out on some great stuff because it doesn't quite fit whatever the algorithm says is going to work. And so some of the greatest shows of all time are the weirdest. Like Breaking Bad is a great example, right? Breaking Bad is a very weird show that no one watched for a really long time. It was just exquisitely made and exquisitely written and acted. And after a while, the word of mouth started to spread around and people started to hear about it. And then in the last season, it did astronomically high numbers. And it was like now it's gone down in history as one of the greatest TV shows of all time. And if an algorithm were making those decisions, that show would have been canceled. So it stayed on the air because human beings said, I don't care what anyone thinks of this show or who watches it or anything. This show is good and I'm keeping it on the air. And without that human input, I fear a little bit that everything is going to get smoothed down. Like the edges of TV are going to get smoothed down and it's going to be a little bit boring.
Yeah, there were shows like The Leftovers or Halt and Catch Fire that were also allowed to fail and have, like, the first season wasn't as great. And then they understood what they needed to change and then they got better, but they got that second chance basically. Yeah. And
Halt and Catch Fire is a show that you started hearing in like season 3. It was like, oh, that show is amazing now. And I was like, really? It's been on for 3 years? But like The Leftovers, no one watched The Leftovers. That show was never watched by a lot of people, ever.
I watched it 10 times to make up for everyone else.
Among writers, almost every writer I know would say that's one of the 10 greatest shows of all time. And it stayed on the air because HBO just said, this show is great. It's fascinating. It's exquisitely made. It's like a really beautiful 7-legged chair that like no one knows what to do with, but it's just good. And we're going to air it for no other reason than that it is good. And that's what we're going to lose if these places start listening only to their algorithms and not to their own voices.
Related to that, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of TV?
Oh, boy.
Lots of existential.
Welcome to France.
I guess on balance, I actually don't know. I was going to say on balance, I'm optimistic because generally I'm an optimistic person, but I don't know. I think the question, is this good, should be the first question anybody asks when a show is pitched. That should be the opening gambit, right? Like, let's discuss whether we think this is good. If you say no, then don't make it. If you say yes, then you can have a conversation about whether it fits your network, whether it will be successful, whether it will get people to subscribe, whatever you want to talk about. And if the answers to those questions are no, you're still allowed to say no to the show. Like, no one's forcing you to make it. The problem is I don't think anyone's asking the question, is this good anymore? And that makes me pessimistic.
What's the question that's asked first now?
Will this cause people to subscribe to our streaming service? Will this drive subscriptions? That's the question that's being asked by all of the streaming services. So, and the way they calculate that in theory is they know Netflix has, 100 million subscribers in the United States. They know that they've almost saturated. They've essentially saturated. Like, there's very few people in America who would ever buy Netflix who don't already have Netflix, right? But they might look at the data that they have, which is now trillions and trillions of pieces of data. And they might say, the Latina and Latino population of America is whatever it is, 17%. I'm making this up. And only 11% of Latin people have Netflix subscriptions. So there's an opportunity here. So then you go in and you pitch a show and your show doesn't have any element of Latin culture in it. And they go, no, thanks. It doesn't matter what your idea is, right? Because they have a goal now, which is to drive subscriptions among the Latin community. And if your idea might be the most brilliant idea that's ever happened, but it might be about South Korean family and that they're saturated with South Korean subscriptions, so they don't need it.
We talk a lot about episodic structure and whether it's changing or not now that a lot of TV shows get dumped, all at once on a platform. Do you think the writing has changed too?
Some aspects of it are. When I started on The Office, we were told that people who describe themselves as avid fans of a show tended to watch 1 out of every 3 episodes. That was the number. So they used that statistic to tell us that we couldn't serialize anything, right? Like you can't end an episode on a cliffhanger and then pick it up where it left off in the next episode, because the chances were, even for avid fans of the show, they might not have seen last week. If you look at those early days of The Office, every episode is like, today is such and such day, or like, today is spring cleaning, or today is diversity day, or whatever. And that was because we were trying basically every week to like invite new people in. Now it's gone completely the other way. And every place wants to essentially have you start watching their service and never stop, right? They want it to be the movie in the book Infinite Jest, where you get to the end of it and you loop back and you start watching it again until you die. That's the goal. So now they want everything serialized. And if you pitch an idea that isn't serialized, they will say to you, like, is there a serialized element here? Like, can you do cliffhangers? Can you make it? And you kind of have to tell them how, because again, they don't want people to stop. They want to dump at least 2 or 3 episodes at a time, and or the entire season, and then they want people to just go bzzz and get all the way through. So what they want is for you to work for like 11 months of your life to make like 10 finely crafted half hours of TV, and then they want everyone to watch it in like 3 hours and 58 minutes.
Yeah, and then forget about it.
And then like move on, yeah. So I think to some extent, yes, story structure has changed, but some shows ignore that. Some shows just do what they're going to do and let the chips fall where they may, so...
If you thought our questions were a little existential until now, wait for this one.
Okay.
Do you think you deserve to be in the good place?
The way it was defined on the show?
Yeah, I guess so. No.
Well, I don't think so. No. Well, the point of the good place was that the system had gotten so skewed that no one deserved, I guess, by the definition of it, no one deserved it. I would like to think that I am closer to deserving it than some other people, that I'm not the very worst person alive, I guess. I think that's a less important question. The show made the argument that whether you right now deserve to be in the good place or not is a less important question than, are you more deserving of it today than you were yesterday, right? Like, are you just getting a little incrementally better every day? And I would like to think that I get incrementally, not every single day, but that I'm heading in the right direction, I guess.
I have a question that we didn't plan actually, but I'm very curious. I think Anaïs and I share a favorite episode, which is flu season in Parks and Rec. Can you tell us how this idea came and how it was written?
That's maybe my favorite episode too. I'll give you some deep backstory. So we made the second season of the show, and then halfway through the second season, Amy came to me and said she was pregnant. And the baby was due to be born right when we would have started shooting season 3. What do we do? So we went and we told NBC, and we were like, listen, if you want to pick us up for another season, which was not a sure thing at the time, and you want the show to be on in September, when shows usually debut, you have to tell us now. And then we have to basically finish season 2 and then immediately shoot a bunch of episodes in season 3 that we can put in the bank, so that Amy can have the baby. And then instead of shooting when we were going to start, we can start when she's recovered and ready, and then we won't miss any time. So we'll shoot. So they wanted to pick us up. So we basically made a 24-episode season 2, took like 3 weeks off, and then immediately shot the first 6 episodes of season 3. It was grueling. We made 30 episodes in one season, basically. And the way that we decided to survive was, we thought, okay, we can't just come up with, we're burned out, right? We can't just come up with 6 random ideas. We need a project. We need one big project that she's going to work on, and then that will give us ideas for episodes around that project. So we came up with this idea that she's going to put on this huge festival, the Harvest Festival. Then we're like, okay, what are some things that would happen? She would have to pitch the idea for the festival to Chris Traeger and Ben Wyatt, her new kind of bosses. She would have to do a presentation to the business community. She would have to do a media blitz. Like it just helped us come up with those ideas. So then we had the idea that when she had to give some kind of big presentation, that she had the flu, and because she was so determined, that she would just fight through the flu. And it just inherently seemed funny to have Leslie trying to fight through the flu. And so
it is. Seeing her with her jeans like as a scarf.
Yeah. So that was the simple idea, was she has the flu and she refuses to admit that she has the flu, and then she takes a bunch of flu medicine and gets very hallucinogenic and delirious. It led to like 4 of the greatest moments, I think, in the show. One of them being Chris Traeger staring in the mirror and telling himself to stop pooping.
Yeah.
Which is truly wonderful.
Iconic.
Yeah.
Stop pooping.
My personal favorite was improvised, which was when Ben comes and says, "You have the flu, let's go to the doctor," and drags Leslie out of her office. Andy Dwyer sitting at the desk because the side story is that April has the flu and is in the hospital, and so he gets Andy to fill in as an assistant. And Norm Hiscock, who wrote the episode, was on the set and said, "Hey, Chris, they're walking right past you when they leave. Like, if you want to say something, say something." He didn't have a line. And so he was like, "Okay." So the next take, they pulled him out, and he said, "Hey, he pointed to his computer, and he said, 'Leslie, I typed in your symptoms into the thing here, and it says you could have network connectivity problems,'" which I contend is a better joke than I've ever written in my entire life. And it just spilled out of Chris Pratt's brain without any hesitation.
Leslie, go home.
No, I can't. I can't go home. I have to get ready for the Chamber of Secrets.
Commerce.
If this meeting does not go perfectly, then the Harvest Festival is going to be over before it began. I cannot go home.
Okay, then who's your doctor?
Anne's my doctor. And she's the most beautiful nurse in the world.
Come on.
Oh, God, now I'm hot. Now it's really hot in
Okay,
here.
well, that's your fever.
Leslie, I typed your symptoms into the thing up here, and it says you could have network connectivity problems.
It was just one of those episodes where, like, when we came up with the idea, we were like, "Oh, that'll be funny. Amy with the flu will be funny." And then just every single thing about it just worked really well. It was like a really magical episode. The jokes that people wrote for it and the way that she performed it and the way that Rob Lowe performed it and the way that Adam Scott performed it. It's also the first time you see Adam Scott or Ben White have a crush on Leslie.
Yeah, that's why it's one of my favorites when he's like, it's Michael Jordan. And like,
yeah. And then he brings her his mom's tomato soup recipe and also some waffles, and she just takes the waffles. And it's maybe the earliest moment that you see a glimmer of that he is interested in her romantically. So yeah, I think that's probably, if I had to gun to my head, it's either that or the episode where the comeback kid, where they have where they walk onto the ice.
This makes me cry of laughter each time when they're walking across the ice and they don't have
the red carpet doesn't go far enough. Yeah,
one of the best moments in television.
Yeah,
so funny.
That was I told Dean Holland, who was directed like 30 episodes of the show, was a producer on the show. I told him, like, there is no length of time that you can have them slip around and goof around that is too long. Like, I will like have them do it for 11 minutes.
The longer the better.
The longer the better. And we kept making it longer and longer when we were editing it.
It's so good. Yeah, we did a whole podcast episode about Parks and Rec.
You did?
Yeah. Because it really is one of our favorite shows.
Thank you.
Yeah. And at the end, we were supposed to say, like, which character we identified the most with. I'm sure you've been asked that before. Like,
well, the characters I usually identify the most with in every show is, like, the normal guy. Like, because, like, it was Jim Halpert on The Office. Like, I certainly am more like him than I am like Dwight Schrute or something, you know. And this, yeah, I agree. And the same is true for Ben. Like when Adam Scott joined the show, it was the moment that I was like, oh, if there is an analog for me in the world of the show now, it's him. He's just like a normal kind of nerdy guy who likes Game of Thrones, and I'm more like him than I am like Tom Haverford or Ron Swanson or something. So those are the people I tend to identify with. They're like the normal guys.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it's better than being like a fascist like Dwight Schrute or something.
Oh yeah,
you know.
Anaïs identifies with Tom.
Really?
Well, because I just make up words all the time. And Chris Traeger, because I will not die. I know that for sure.
Congratulations.
I'm really
immortal.
Counting on medicine for to figure it out before I get to that point.
Chris Traeger is based a little bit on my dad.
Really?
My dad was an obsessive runner who ran so much that he can't run anymore because his knees are shot. But there's a monologue, a talking head. He talks about where he's run like 85,000 miles, which is a third of the way to the moon, and his goal was to run to the moon. That's an actual line my dad said.
Oh, wow.
Yes. My dad told me that at some point in his life he had run a third of the way to the moon, and that he hoped before he died to run to the moon.
That's awesome.
And I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I literally just wrote it down and had a very insane character say it on TV, and everyone was like, that's funny. And I was like, no, that's my actual dad.
Yeah, well, I don't run at all. I hate it, but
there you go.
But you fear death.
Yeah, exactly. I'm terrified of death.
So you're purely counting on science.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Someone else will figure it out for me. Yeah. I'm not going to do any effort. what's the question you wanted us to ask and we didn't?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Is this something you ask of everybody at the end of an interview?
We try, yeah.
Probably something about Paris. Like, what's your favorite part of Paris, or what do you love most about Paris?
What do you love most about Paris?
You wait a second. This isn't fair. You said, what's the question that I wanted you to ask and you didn't, but now you just turn it around
Yes.
to ask me the question?
Yeah.
Oh, Christ. I've been here, I think, 6 times in my life. My wife and I came here on our honeymoon. We came here again on our 10-year anniversary. And I'm sure this is a very boring answer for people who live in the city, but I have the experience when I'm here where as I drive around or walk around, it's like every corner that I come around, I see the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Like, and by that, I don't mean like a park or a beautiful tree or roses. I mean like just a building that is so stunningly beautiful and ornate and has the most beautiful ironwork across the balcony and the most beautiful like carved stone lion above the door. And people are just walking past it like they're so bored, you know? I had this experience. So beauty, the answer is beauty. But I had this experience for The Good Place. We went to Athens. We shot in Athens and Paris. But when we were in Athens, I had never been to Athens before. And we were walking in some neighborhood and there was like this ancient ruin, like this, 4th century BC column, like sticking up out of the ground. And there was just like a sad little sign on it that was like, here on this site, Socrates did this and whoever did there, Aeschylus was here.
Yeah.
And I was like, these people are just bored. Like they're just walking. This is in America. There's nothing from the 4th century BC that's like, you know what I mean? It blew my mind that you could live in a city that has that kind of like cultural history and not care. And I feel that way about Paris and beauty. I feel like it's stunning to me every time I'm here that this city exists and it's so huge and everywhere you go, you see the same kind of beauty. It's just amazing.
Yeah. You're going to make us appreciate it more.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're bored of it.
Hello.
I had a Swedish friend who told an American friend, my school is older than your country. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles has some nice things about it. But one of the things it does not have is beauty, I would say. That beauty in Los Angeles is natural. It's the oceans and the mountains in the distance. But the city itself is not beautiful. And I was walking on Sunset Boulevard, and a car full of tourists pulled over, and they said, "Excuse me," in accented English, "Excuse me, can you point us toward Sunset Boulevard?" And I said, "This is it. You're on it." And they looked around confused, and they're like, "No, the world famous Sunset Boulevard." And I was like, "Yeah, sorry, this is it. It's not that great. Like it's just a dumb road with some like rock clubs along the side." And the look of like sadness on their faces, it was haunting because it was like, "Yeah, this is all we have to offer. I'm sorry."
Oh. Thank you so much for coming and answering all of our very French questions.
My pleasure.
We had a great time and we loved your book and hope it does well in France.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was very fun.
C'était PIC TV. Merci Marie.
Merci Anaïs.
Et merci infiniment à Mike Schur de nous avoir rendu visite en vrai dans le studio. On l'a pas précisé, mais il nous a aussi dit qu'il détestait Kant et rien que pour ça, on le kiffe.
Ouais, et il a dit que Albert Camus était un beau gosse dans son livre et rien que pour ça, je le kiffe.
Et merci à vous les Pikis de nous écouter toutes les semaines. Vous pouvez retrouver tous les épisodes de PIC TV sur Slate Audio ou sur votre appli de podcast préféré. Cette fois-ci, promis, on vous laisse tranquille pendant un petit moment.
Enfin, pas trop quand même, puisque tous les vendredis, vous pouvez nous retrouver dans notre autre podcast, Amis. Pour cette saison, Anaïs me fait découvrir ses films d'horreur préférés, tandis que je lui fais découvrir mes films romantiques préférés.
En attendant, si vous avez aimé ce podcast, parlez-en autour de vous et n'hésitez pas à nous mettre 5 étoiles et un petit commentaire. Salut!
PIC TV est un podcast d'Anaïs Bordages et Marie Telling, produit et réalisé par Slate.fr sous la direction de Christophe Caron et Benjamin Ours. Production éditoriale, réalisation et montage, Aurélie Rodriguez.